Hey guys, so in this episode of Make It with Calvin, I'm talking about some modifications I've made to the GoPro rig, and while a lot of it stayed the same, some of it has changed. So let's talk about it. Okay, so you'll notice that the rig as a whole is pretty much the same that it was before, but there's definitely been some modifications. The first thing is I've put what's called a cold shoe mount here on the top, so I can attach, in this case, the Rode shotgun microphone or any other kind of microphones, things like that, if I so chose. Now, in this case, the reason why I have the Rode on here is partly for visual sake and partly because there are times where if I'm filming, it's nice to have a microphone that I can just aim at somebody and capture the audio versus trying to hook up a microphone. They got to walk around with the Tascam, all that stuff. Or alternatively, if Danielle and I are filming her show Behind the Adventure where we talk about things, having this is nice because hopefully it will help us block out a lot of background noise while at the same time still giving us better audio than what we'd get with the GoPro. Originally, we would just film it with the Tascam, if I even remember the batteries for it. And that worked fine to a point, but it would capture everything, and that's not always ideal. In my parents' backyard, and please ignore all the cars going by because stinking everybody has to drive by when we're filming. You too, pickup guy. So that's what the cold shoe mount is for. Also, you can mount lights and other accessories, which is really helpful if, say, we're filming in like a dark cave or something like that. It gives us more flexibility. And now moving on from there, you'll notice we still have the original handles with the O-rings. These are super nice. They're tried and tested. They work great. But I did use those 1/4-20 heat set inserts in here, and I figured it was just a better option over trying to thread it. It was easier that way, and especially considering this is just made from GTEx high-speed PLA instead of a nylon, I figured that was going to hold up better. Only reason why I'm using the high-speed PLA is if you saw my all-metal hot-end video, I haven't had time to flash the firmware on my X2, so I didn't have time to get the parts printed as I had the Osco West show and then jumped on a plane the next morning to fly down in preparation for the Grand Canyon trip. So the high-speed PLA, though, it held up great out in the Grand Canyon. It also helps that it was not exceptionally hot out there, so that was pretty nice. Now moving down to the bottom, I've decided to make the handles removable entirely so the rig can be torn down in the event of damage, or we need to make the thing as tiny as possible for transportation. That way we're not trying to shove a full rig in, we can just shove it to pieces. It's easy enough. Now, one other thing I did differently is the old versions, you'll remember, had the snap mount on here. And while in the beginning that was super nice because I was thinking I was going to be switching cameras in and out all the time, it actually caused more headache than it did help. And part of the problem is either the snap mount would pretty much require you to hammer it in there, which is not ideal, or on the flip side, it would literally just flop around in there, which is also not ideal. Plus the fact that we did lose one camera once to the ocean, which was pretty painful. Thankfully, it was just a $50 camera, but losing the footage was definitely the more painful part. So on that note, I decided, you know what? I'm going to put all this effort into redesigning this. I might as well just make the mount solid, so that way we don't have to worry about any of that stuff happening. And I figure it just made more sense, so it's one less thing rattling around on there. Now, while we were out in the Grand Canyon, one suggestion that Danielle had would be the ability to interface this to a tripod, because there were times where all we could do was just set this down on the ground or on a table or something like that. And that works to a point, but the problem is the camera is so close to the ground. Let's say you kind of wanted to film into a canyon for a time lapse. Can't really do that. So one modification I am going to make is I'm going to put a 1/4-20 heat set insert here on the bottom. So this could be quickly screwed and unscrewed from a tripod or a similar mounting device, as a 1/4-20 screw is a very common size. Kind of helps that I use them in here as well. And one last thing I did, it's more of a convenience more than anything, was, as you saw in the heat set insert press video, I actually put an M5 insert there on the ends, and that's just to prevent the nut from falling out, which was you know, more of an annoyance more than anything. The less things you have to worry about when you're trying to film on the field, the better. And believe me, we have enough things to worry about. The last thing we want to worry about is, whoops, the net fell out. Oops, we're stuck. Now, on a more personal note, the thing I will say that's really cool about this setup is the fact that it gets a lot of positive attention. Now, while we were out in the Grand Canyon, we decided to leave the Rode mic behind. We figured we probably weren't going to need it. And I think it was actually a pretty wise decision to do that because we already had enough stuff, with us. So really we were running around with the rigs like this. Danielle still had her white nylon rig on her. And the amount of people that actually were curious about it surprised me, because normally when we go out and film, not a whole lot of people seem to take note of it, but we had a lot of people curious about it. I remember when we did a 4-wheel tour, there was a couple from, I believe, Tennessee over in that area. They were really curious about it. So while we were just hanging out at a Vista Point, they were like, hey, kind of curious about it. And we actually fired up the GoPro and let them mess around with it a little bit.
So what do? You just point and shoot. I mean, it's already going. I have it recording right now, so you don't have to press anything. But yeah, you can like scan it, you can tilt it, so you can do whatever.
You don't have to GoPro.
GoPro is just a handle, but it's nice because you can use it one-handed, two-handed. Yeah. And they were like, wow, that's actually really easy to film with.
I
love it. I made that, yeah.
Okay. Thanks. 3D printed.
Pardon?
3D printed.
Yeah. They're amazing, I'll tell you.
And I remember I was filming a ground squirrel over at Hermit's Rest, put the camera down and backed away a little bit to let the squirrel do what the squirrel does. And at the end of it, there was a gentleman there who had 2 large DSLRs with big lenses, and he was blown away by our setup.
Taking your picture?
Oh no.
Okay,
we're watching the squirrel.
Oh, didn't you see him there? I thought you were taking a picture of her.
Oh no. He's just munching on things.
And everybody was genuinely amazed that not only was it 3D printed, but it was something that I actually designed myself. And it's just been a slow cooking project over the last few years to get it to this point. So on a personal note, as corny as it is for me to say this, that actually really meant a lot to me, that just random people thought this was a really, really cool thing to film with. The reason why I say that is when you're doing content and you're so focused on getting it out there, you sometimes forget the positive impact it can have on people. So on the very slim off chance that any of the people that we ran into on our travels who saw this and stopped and asked us about it, I want to say thank you. It really means a lot when people come on over and are curious about it and figure out that 3D printing can actually be done in a more practical manner and things like that. It kind of reminds me, hey, you know what? I guess there is some educational value to what I'm doing. Now, if you're interested in making one of these, I will have a link in the description to where you can purchase the files for this. Sales from the purchase of the files help support not only my channel, but also really me going on super fun adventures with Danielle and going out there and showing off stuff. So if you guys are interested in this, link to it is down in the description. And if you also do me a favor, definitely go on over and check out Danielle's channel. No obligation to subscribe if the outdoors aren't your thing. I totally understand. But if you know somebody who does, send them over there and maybe drop it a subscribe if you feel like it. We put a lot of effort into the content, and it would really mean a lot if you guys checked it out. So as for me, I got to get busy designing up the iterations on this and work on trying to flash the X2 so I can actually print one in some really tough carbon fiber filament. So see you guys here next time on Make It with Calvin.